Hey guys, what's up? So I'm back with another reading of Milo Yiannopoulos' Dangerous. So just a disclaimer beforehand, I don't, and all of the written ideas and opinions and works in this book are not my own. I don't own the rights to this book, yada yada yada, disclaimers and plagiarism and all that. So, I think I'm going to be I'm probably going to do the prologue and then chapter 1. And then I'll probably stop because chapter 1 is 20 pages long, and without interruptions, it's probably going to, this video is probably going to be an hour. A lot of these readings are probably going to be close to an hour. If not an hour, maybe even over an hour if I interject a lot and just give my own opinions. But yeah, so the prologue is called The Art of Troll. So this should be interesting, and then chapter 1 is Why the Progressive Left Hates Me, which should be interesting. Chapter 2 is Why the Alt-Right Hates Me. I wish we could get to that one, but unfortunately I'm probably going to, like I said, this video is probably going to stretch on. So unfortunately that'll have to be for the next video. But yeah. So, without further ado, let's get started. The one comment that I got on the last reading, Ranting Doom guy, enjoyed the reading, so I'll keep doing it. I feel tempted to read this in a British accent. Like, I know why, because Milo Yiannopoulos is obviously British. Although I don't know if my British accent would be that good. I feel like it would be a pretty shitty British accent, but I'm tempted to do it in a British accent. Let me know if you want me to do these readings in a British accent, because I think that would be kind of funny. But yeah, so let's get started. Prologue, The Art of Troll. 2016 was the year of the troll, and, as one of the world's most famous trolls, I have special insight into what that means. I beg, Milo Yiannopoulos is basically a professional troll, you know, like I said in the last video, so it's pretty funny. What does it mean to be a troll? If you stray too far into whiny, crybaby social justice circles, trolling and political disagreement are one and the same. Others see no distinction between trolls and those who send poorly worded death threats to public figures. Trolling is far more complicated and joyous than any of that. The ideal troll baits the target into a trap, from which there is no escape without public harassment, or public embarrassment, sorry. It is an art beyond the grasp of mere mortals. It is part trickery and part viciousness. Trolling has many elements. It's often about telling truths that others don't want to hear. It's about tricking, pranking, and generally riling up your targets. And it's about creating a hilarious, entertaining public spectacle. The best part, most left-wingers refuse to accept that they're being trolled. Is it any wonder that a fabulous faggot like me is so good at it? Even calling myself a faggot is trolling you. Calling myself a fabulous faggot is trolling you fabulously. It's an old trick I picked up from drag queens. Always tell the joke the other guy's going to tell about you first and make it funny. It's an incredibly disarming tactic. It's like Eminem saying, "Y'all act like you never seen a white person before." Picking deserving targets and making them hopping mad is essential to good trolling. So is knowing both sides. Left-wing reporters describe me to disbelieving readers as a misogynist, racist, white nationalist, alt-right bigot. Actual neo-Nazis, meanwhile, call me a degenerate kike faggot. Wow. At least one of them must be wrong, but their collective confusion is so glorious that I don't want to correct either. This is top-tier trolling, annoying your critics so much they print hysterical lies about you because they can't beat you on the facts and because you get under their skin so effectively. They torpedo their own credibility and readership while your own fan base grows. Want to know why the trolls are winning? It's because no matter how much our critics hate us, yell at us, ban us from their comment sections, stamp their feet, throw their toys out of their stroller pretending that jokes on Twitter can cause physical pain, we're the only ones telling the truth anymore. This kind of reminds me of a guy I was friends with on Facebook for a while. I actually thought he was cool for like a minute, and then I realized he was a giant douchebag. He was a friend that I met through like wrestling groups and stuff, and I mean, the guy could not handle opinions or criticism whatsoever. Like, he would get overly butthurt about anything, and he gets political sometimes too. And of course, he's a big leftist. But it seems like more and more wrestling fans are coming out as leftists and SJWs. Like, wrestling fans are basically SJWs as a whole, which is just sad. Um, but no, like I would comment on some of his posts and just say like shit, just because I knew he was a douchebag, so I figured I might as well have some fun and troll him once in a while. And I wasn't even saying outlandish things. I was just like pointing out contradictions in what he'd said in like past posts and then posts he'd make, because he would contradict himself all the time, and it was just funny. And then like, I don't know, it was just funny. He eventually blocked me because I called him out on being such a wuss over a freaking meme. Like, he freaked out over a meme, and he like freaked out on a mutual friend of ours, and I basically told him to stop being a little bitch and just shut the fuck up and go back to watching Raw or SmackDown or whatever he was watching, and then he blocked me. So that's what this reminds me of. But anyways, that's enough of that tangent. To be a good troll, you must have a certain level of disregard for other people's feelings. But the difference between trolling and cruelty is that cruelty has no purpose except to hurt someone. Trolls may hurt the feelings of delicate wallflowers, but they do so because reasoned argument and polite entreaty have failed. In my experience, most of those delicate wallflowers turn out to be sociopathic professional activists cynically playing the victim, trying to persuade you that jokes on Twitter can cause lasting psychological damage. Makes sense. Oh, also, that same guy that I was just talking about, he actually made a post about Milo Yiannopoulos, funnily enough. He called him Gay Hitler. Yes, Gay Hitler. Yeah, Milo is Gay Hitler, you know, a Jewish, gay Jewish man who is married to a black guy, but he is Gay Hitler, right. Okay. The most high-minded troll should troll only in the name of debunking some untruth or exposing wrongdoing or hypocrisy. That's what I try to do. When I see respectable publications wasting time writing about cultural appropriation or an innocent joke deemed racist by overzealous, ankle-biting bloggers, it's like my bat signal. In my mastery of trolling, I am surpassed by one man, President Donald J. Trump. He trolled his way to the presidency. Yeah, kind of. Like me, Daddy, as I like to call him, Doom. In itself another troll, only went after deserving targets. The media, Hillary and Bill Clinton, the disabled, and political correctness. A master showman, President Donald J. Trump can command the media's attention even though most of their leading lights utterly despise him. Kardashianism, I mean narcissism, rules in America, and if you come across as self-involved enough, journalists will get drawn into the fantasy too. They will follow your every move. I could post a 1-second video of me sneezing on Facebook and get 5,000 comments. Azealia Banks cleaned out her closet and it was covered by almost every magazine in America. But forcing people who hate you and everything you stand for to point cameras at you for over a year? That's a level of trolling I can only hope to achieve. Trolling is the perfect weapon of a political dissident intent on spreading forbidden or inconvenient truths. One of the purposes of trolling is to generate as much noise and public outcry as possible, which has the added effect of drawing attention to the very facts society is so eager to suppress. The mere act of unashamedly revealing such truths is frequently all that is needed to generate the outcry in the first place. Trolling and truth are telling made for each other. Two bold acts of modern rebellion, existing in perfect, intricate symbiosis. Wow, I can't talk today. If you tell lies to and about men, if you spread conspiracy theories about the wage gap and campus rape culture, if you tweet kill all white men and I bathe in male tears, if you close comment sections because you hate being ridiculed by readers who are smarter than you, if you prefer ideology and activism to facts, if you create a hateful atmosphere in which it's okay to laugh at white people but no one else, if you are mean and vindictive and cruel and sociopathic yet try to cloak yourself in the language of tolerance and diversity, if you get people fired for bringing up studies or asking you to justify your claims, if you whip up outrage mobs or over innocent jokes on social media, if you see racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and every other imaginable kind of bigotry everywhere, and if you insist on warping reality to conform to your delusions, don't be surprised if there's a backlash. I agree. I agree so hard right now. I agree so much with what Milo's saying, and I'm sorry if it comes off if I'm sucking Milo's dick here, but like, no, I agree. You know, especially with the what is it? If you create a hateful atmosphere in which it's okay to laugh at white people but no one else, I so agree with that. Like on Facebook, there are so many memes out there where it's like white people this or white people that or something. But I guarantee you, if you posted a meme that was making a joke at the expense of like a black person or a Hispanic person, or a woman, or God forbid, a gay person or a transgender person, uh, there would be so much outrage and so much offense taking. Like it's crazy. Like I'm sorry, but when it comes to comedy, no one and nothing should be off the table. Okay, if you can't laugh at yourself once in a while, if you can't take a joke at your expense, then get the fuck out. Seriously, get the fuck out and grow the fuck up. You know, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with jokes at the expense of like white men or white people or whatever, but when that's the only thing that's being joked about and nothing else, like like black people, Hispanic people, everyone else is off the table except white people, it gets a little annoying. Like, come on now. Come on now. But whatever. Alright. Don't be surprised if that looks like President Trump and me and a whole lot of other badasses. We don't care how egregiously you lie about us. As long as facts remain offensive, the age of the troll will never end. In times of universal deceit, wrote George Orwell, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. We live in a world where politicians lie to you, the media lies to you, your school teachers and your professors lie to you. True. My sociology professor comes to mind. And the sad thing is that he actually seemed like a pretty, he was a cool guy. Like he was funny, he was cool. But like he would get political and stuff, and it was very obvious that he was very left leaning and everything, and I don't know, just, yeah. So I mean, yeah, the media definitely. Yeah, politicians, yeah. It's little wonder young people on campus retreat into safe spaces when they hear I'm coming. The juddering foundation of lies that props up the progressive worldview has become so fragile, even the slightest bit of contrary speech is enough to shatter it. I bring a neutron bomb when a penknife would do just as well, and the results are always spectacular. I feel no animosity or hatred toward the kids who hide behind safe spaces and social media blocking programs to protect their worldview. Their fragility is the result of an older generation's cowardice and its inability to sort feel-good fiction from hard realities. They wanted so desperately to believe that everyone is equal and that we could all get along, and now their kids have swallowed the lies they barely believe themselves. Trigger warnings and therapy sessions are the result. Do not presume that just because I take sympathy on the crybabies, I tend to go easy on them. I don't, and you shouldn't either. Free thinkers and cultural libertarians take heart. Throughout history, there have always been myths and irrationalities to defeat, and there have always been those who defend them to the bitter, tearful end. Truth, like freedom, must be fought for in every generation. If you're reading this book, you'll likely be one of the people fighting for it in this time around. Good on you. It's cool to be counterculture, and we're it. 20 years ago, it was conservatives banning video games because they found them offensive. True. Yeah, it's true. It's weird because it's like, the culture war. It's funny because 10 to 15 years ago, 20 years ago, like it was cool to be, it was cool to be liberal. Like it was cool because at the time, things were still, everything was still pretty fairly conservative. Not everything, but things were still fairly conservative. So it was cool to rebel and be liberal and stuff. But now it's almost kind of flipped. Now it's almost the cool thing to be like conservative and or like a libertarian or something, or just something that is not what the mainstream media is and everything else is. Like something that mainstream celebrities aren't constantly spewing. Like celebrities and mainstream media are always talking about feminism. So naturally, people naturally people are going to start rejecting that and saying no, that's bullshit. They're going to be, you know, anti-feminists, and just stuff like that. So, but yeah. Anyways, yes, even the rebellious heroes of now progressives are doing the same thing. Even the rebellious heroes of my youth have gone soft. In 1997, Marilyn Manson was outraging Christians and social conservatives. The Antichrist superstar should have been a Trump fan. He was practically built for it. It was a real letdown when he came out with a music video in which he decapitated a Trump lookalike. Yeah. It's pretty sad how many like celebrities like that have kind of just like bent over backwards, or like have just lost their spine and just do things to appease the masses and appease, you know, the CNNs of the world and stuff, just so they won't get a bunch of negative media attention. Like it's sad how many celebrities don't have a backbone, just so they can stay in their social circles and just so they can maintain their reputation. It's sad. Today, the best way to rebel is to be conservative, or even just libertarian. Conservatives are no longer the cultural elites censoring dissident leftist media. Leftists are the cultural elites censoring dissident conservatives. As a result, a marvelously rebellious young force has arisen on the web. It's bold and it's subversive, and I'm its most dangerous faggot. 3 introductions is enough, yes? Let's begin. Well, and then chapter 1, why the progressive left hates me. But I feel like conservatives, like modern day conservatives now, I feel like it's beginning to change, like, because you've got your old guard conservatives, you know, like the Mitt Romneys and people like that. But I think you've got new school conservatives too, who aren't like so uptight. They believe in some tradition and stuff. You know, they believe that, wait, you know, not everything needs to change into this, you know, this completely, like, weird dystopian vision. Like, no, socialism is not a good idea, and just stuff like that. But this distorted new world, you know, so, I don't know, just something I've kind of noticed. I think it's different. To be conservative now is a little different than it was, like, 30 years ago. Alright, so Milo opens up the chapter with a quote from P.J. O'Rourke. At the core of liberalism is the spoiled child, miserable as all spoiled children are, unsatisfied, demanding, ill-disciplined, despotic, and useless. Yeah. Alright, 93% of workplace deaths are male. Rates of rape and domestic abuse are far higher in Muslim communities than non-Muslim ones. The black community has a huge problem with crime and drugs. These statements are all facts. Yet in today's America, introducing them to the conversation causes instant outrage. Like when I tell cab drivers curry is not a deodorant. If you discuss these inconvenient truths, you are expected to begin with certain caveats. I'm a feminist, but the majority of African Americans are law-abiding citizens, but I'll try breathing through my mouth, but caveats are irrelevant. I refuse to preface any discussion of Islam, for instance, with the usual fake niceties about radical extremists. I prefer to discuss facts directly, and I use exaggeration and bombast, often outrageously. Challenging the myths of the left causes them to lose their minds. I puncture their fantasies with attention-grabbing wit and style. I'm also hot, which I'll cover in excruciating detail throughout this book. Milo is pretty fucking hot, I will say that. What really drives left-wingers up the wall is that I should be one of them. People like me are supposed to be good little metropolitan fags and vote Democrat. Which, yeah, like, because I made that video talking about why SJWs are the real racists and homophobes and stuff like that, why they don't actually, why, you know, they claim to stand up for, you know, like gay rights and you know, all these minorities, but really they're just wanting these minorities to conform to their belief system, and when they don't, they treat them like lesser than human being, and they treat them like they're a horrible human being. Like, if like, God forbid, a gay person or a female or a black person, like, comes out as conservative or libertarian, or not even those things, like, just they come out and they don't agree with all of these SJW talking points, and they just get cast out. It's like a one giant cult. Like, I made a video sort of talking about this. So yeah, go to anti-war protests and experiment with quinoa and hummus. We're supposed to pretend it's totally believable Rey could pilot the Millennium Falcon with greater skill than Han Solo. Yeah. The new Star Wars trilogy, yeah, they butchered that badly. Never mind the fact that she learns the Force in like half a day. Yes! Thank you! Oh my god, yes. Holy shit. Sorry, I just had to get that out, because that, especially The Last Jedi, was fucking such a piss-poor Star Wars movie. Say what you will about the prequels, but The Last Jedi, in my opinion, is the worst Star Wars movie ever. Out of all of them, it is the worst. Even before the left descended into identity politics lunacy, I wanted nothing to do with them. I wasn't quite the conservative icon I am today either, though. I was doing something different. Go to anti-war protest. Well, yeah. I mean, I would consider myself anti-war as well. I don't think we need to be getting ourselves involved in any wars. That doesn't absolutely call for our attention, but I spent my youth in drug-saturated nightclubs in London, losing my virginity in interracial fivesomes with drag queens. Wow. Experimenting with every depraved form of escapism I could find. And I listened to a lot of Mariah Carey, Marilyn Manson, and Rage Against the Machine. I also studied music theory. Schopenhauer and Wittgenstein and I read Margaret Thatcher biographies, shot my dad's guns, and dreamt of meeting George W. Bush. I did later in life, but by then he wasn't right-wing enough for me. Meeting George W. Bush. I'm not going to address that. Little did I know that I was breaking all the left's rules by reading Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and daydreaming that I was the heroically entrepreneurial protagonist, Dagny Taggart. I came to represent the left's greatest fear, an opponent who is cooler, smarter, better dressed, edgier, and more popular than them. To understand precisely why the left hates people like me so much, it's necessary to understand how and why their politics have changed over the past few decades. Why all this stuff matters, and pay attention at the back, because this is important. In the past, the left were champions of blue-collar workers against the managerial big business classes. Jobs, pay, and decent living standards for ordinary citizens were the priorities. A few leftists, Bernie Sanders in the United States and Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, continue this tradition. They are notably significantly older than most other left-wing politicians. They are also loathed by much of the establishment in their respective parties. Why? Because the mainstream left today has very different priorities. There is no reason why the left had to abandon its old blue-collar base. The industries that employed their voters have largely disappeared, but the voters themselves didn't go anywhere. Indeed, as voters in old working-class heartlands entered economic crisis, the left should have been more attentive to their concerns. But that didn't happen. Instead, leftists chose to ignore the former working class and turn to a very different electoral coalition. Latte-sipping metropolitan voters, fairy tale-dwelling anti-war activists, ugly women, sigh, and minorities. The fact that minorities were only a small section of the electorate didn't bother the left. They could always import new voters. Zero fucks were given about the rapid influx of cheap labor or the deluge of new welfare recipients. Both of these obvious consequences only added further pressure to the already beleaguered, long-forgotten working-class base in the society. This reminds me of the movie Scream, where when Sydney, aka Neve Campbell, finds out it was, spoiler alert, her boyfriend who was trying to butcher her and all her friends the whole time. Sydney didn't let him get away with it, however. She shot him in the head. After they were so wantonly betrayed, it's remarkable to me that millions of former working-class families still remain loyal to the left. As their electoral coalition changed, so too did the left's politics. They became less concerned with pay, more contemptuous of old industries, and venomous towards the cultural values of their old voters. Barack Obama's infamous 2008 quip that former working class communities cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment, this is cited, epitomized the new attitude of the left. Leftists have always been well practiced at turning social classes against one another, but the working classes can prove frustrating to socialists intent on class warfare. Marxists were particularly perturbed when, during World War I, the European working class, with the exception of Russia, chose to fight for king and country instead of rise up against their masters. This is understandable to a certain extent. Socialist leaders like Marx had never done a day of work in their life. In the 1920s, the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci had an idea for a new form of revolution, one based on culture, not class. According to Gramsci, the reason the proletariat failed to rise up was because old conservative ideas like loyalty to one's country, family values, and religion held too much sway in working class communities. If that sounds redolent of Obama's comment about guns and religion, it should. His line of thinking is directly descended from the ideological tradition of Gramsci. Gramsci argued that as a precursor to revolution, the old traditions of the West, or cultural hegemony, as he called it, would have to be systematically broken down. To do so, Gramsci argued that proletarian intellectuals should seek to challenge the dominance of traditionalism in education and the media, and create a new revolutionary culture. If you've ever wondered why you're forced to take diversity or gender studies courses at university, or why your professors all seem to hate Western civilization, blame Gramsci. In the 1950s and 60s, a group of European expatriate academics known as the Frankfurt School married Gramsci's idea of cultural revolution to the idea of a new revolutionary vanguard, one made up of students, feminists, and minorities, many of whom felt excluded from mainstream Western culture and sought to change it. Their ideas would provide much of the intellectual ballast for the cultural upheavals of the 1960s and the subsequent transformation of the left. Andrew Breitbart wrote about them extensively in his best-selling book, Righteous Indignation. The New Left, as they came to be called, were responsible for the early stages of the left's pivot away from traditional class politics and towards the divisive, politically correct world of gender, racial, and sexual politics we know today. They were the ones responsible for making issues like abortion, the reversal of gender roles, racial justice, pacifism, and multiculturalism into major platforms of the left. If they could keep their rainbow coalition acting and voting as a bloc and focus all their hatred on the weary white male working class, then political dominance would soon be assured. Thus begun the reign of identity politics. Now, I want to, before I go any further, I want to say that, like I said in the beginning of this series, in the beginning of, I believe I said this in the beginning of the last video, but if I didn't, I'll say it here. I don't agree with Milo on everything. You know, I don't, like, but when it comes to Milo, I'm, like I said, or at least I think I said, I'm kind of 50-50. There are some things that I lean left on. You know, I don't consider myself conservative by any means. I know Milo, I guess, would be a conservative. But yeah, I just wanted to say that for a minute. These sneering students who joined the New Left in the 1960s became professors who are teaching you today, rebelling against the overprotective, military-minded, and somewhat austere World War II generation. Novelist and former noted liberal John Updike wrote of the disdain that he saw from Cambridge professors and Manhattan lawyers and their guitar-strumming children, privileged members of a privileged nation, full of aesthetic disdain for their own defenders, spitting on the cops who were trying to keep the USA and its many amenities intact. Cultural Marxism, nurtured by the Frankfurt School, struck a chord, even though, for the most part, these young baby boomers didn't realize where their ideas were coming from. Rock musicians, the standard bearers of young boomer culture, became fierce advocates for pacifism, feminism, gay rights, and all the other causes of the New Left. Alright. Um, uh, yeah. There is of course another reason for the New Left. There is of course another reason the New Left was so successful in the 1960s. A lot of their arguments made sense. There was racism to be fought, structural, institutionalized, and legal racism. Sexism in the workplace was rampant, even worse than on Mad Men, and gays were oppressed by conservatives and liberals alike. Yeah, true. The tragedy is that instead of granting life to the inherently divisive doctrines of cultural Marxism, these problems could easily have been solved with the milder tradition of classical liberalism. Indeed, in 1950s Britain, it was classical liberal politicians of the Wolfenden community who began the process of decriminalizing homosexuality. Marxists played little, if any, role in it. By the end of the 1960s, when the New Left were still on the fringe, their milder allies in the social liberal movement were already well on their way to winning America's most important cultural battles. Jim Crow was dismantled, and the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts were passed. For better or worse, it was definitely for worse. The New Left became the defining youth movement of the 60s and 70s, and although it initially perceived as radical, its ideas would eventually come to dominate modern culture. The counterculture of the 1960s became the prevailing culture of the 1980s. By the 1990s, a decade in which, despite the LA riots and the OJ trial, we could all watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air without agonizing over white supremacist tropes in the Banks household, the New Left had become the establishment. It was now difficult to argue that any social group in the West lacked equality under the law. Indeed, thanks to the persistence of government redistribution plans and the early growth of affirmative action, some groups were already getting favored treatment, a sign of things to come. But the New Left still achieved complete control of media, academia, and the arts, just at the point when they were no longer needed. Metropolitan elites of today's leftist political class follow the intellectual legacy of Gramsci and his contempt for working class, traditionalist culture. The knee-jerk endorsements of feminism, Black Lives Matter, and gay identity politics are in no small part related to the Marxist tendency to back the revolutionary class, quote-unquote, against the, quote-unquote, oppressors, regardless of facts. Another byproduct of the 1960s leftism is the unabashed hatred of white males who are, correctly, identified as the architects of Western culture. For the New Left, white men are the cultural counterpart to the economic bourgeois class in classical Marxist theory, a class of oppressors that must be overthrown by the oppressed. The influence of the New Left is seen most clearly in universities, where efforts to deconstruct the pillars of Western civilization, from classical liberal humanism to the mythical patriarchy, proceed just as Gramsci would have wanted. By the early 2000s, in firm control of the baby boomers' cultural consciousness, the New Left was on course to become the new cultural hegemony. I guess I don't know as many words as I thought I did. Conservatives, preoccupied with defeating the Soviet Union and reviving the free market, failed to grasp the gravity of the left's cultural revolution. On the right, culture wars were only fought by social conservatives, spearheaded by evangelical Christians who obsessed over unwinnable fights like gay marriage and alienated young people with harebrained censorship campaigns against rock music, comic books, and video games. When social conservatives started going after Harry Potter for quote-unquote promoting witchcraft, oh god, I remember that. I had a friend who couldn't watch Harry Potter for some reason, and I think I know why now. It became embarrassingly clear which side had won the culture wars. And it's culture that matters. Politics is downstream from culture, as Andrew Breitbart used to say. Politics is just a symptom, which is one of the reasons I spend more time on college campuses than I do in Washington, D.C. If you're reading this and you're in college or you recently graduated, you can lay the blame squarely at your parents' generation for handing culture to the regressive lunatics and SJWs. The previous generation of conservatives failed completely in their attempts to save academia, the media, and the arts. In many cases, they didn't bother to fight at all, preferring to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on think tanks and magazines complaining about the problem while doing absolutely nothing to fix it, as brilliantly set out in a well-known 2016 essay in the Claremont Review of Books. Fox's Tucker Carlson is refreshingly harsh on this point, describing the conservative establishment as overpaid, underperforming, tax-exempt, sinecure holders, and that's cited. Liberals, meanwhile, were setting up university departments, organizing activist groups, and installing themselves in Hollywood and New York City. By 2010, the argument that racism, sexism, and homophobia still ran rampant in Western society started to look absurd. I suspect the reason gay marriage became such a cause celebre for the left during this period is because it was, for them, the last clear-cut legislative battle that could be easily fought and won. And I mean, I supported gay marriage then, I still do now, so I don't know where Milo stands on that exactly. I'm pretty sure Milo married, though, so you can't have that much of a problem with it. Like carnival magicians, the left kept voters distracted, so they didn't notice they were being taxed oppressively, regulated minutely, regulated minutely, and manipulated in countless other ways. Seriously, you have to hand it to them. These guys put the work in. I do admire leftists' energy levels. If I had to spend all day screaming and crying, stewing in my anger, blaming made-up concepts like the patriarchy for my failure in defending Barack Obama, I'd be exhausted. Modern American liberals took Orwell's 2 Minutes Hate from 1984 and turned it into 24 hours. The 2 Minutes Hate is a daily ritual in which every citizen must watch a video depicting the party's enemies and direct hatred toward them for 2 minutes. CNN has published several articles comparing Trump's presidency to Orwell's dystopian fantasy, sanctimoniously oblivious to their own offenses. Yeah. How do they keep those hatred levels up? Maybe I've stumbled onto the real reason why they love Starbucks so much. Why the left hates you. Because of their intellectual pedigree and the angry, victim-centric doctrine of cultural Marxism, the left is committed to defending a world view which arranges women, minorities, and gays in a league table of oppression, with straight white men as the eternal oppressors at the top of the list, followed by gay white men, followed by straight white women, all the way down to a paraplegic black immigrant Muslim transsexuals at the very bottom. Straight white men are the new whatever, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, the group oppressing everyone else. The academic phrase for this is intersectionality. Intersectionalists are the ones responsible for dreaming up new, ever more bizarre categories of oppression. These fun people believe there are intersecting categories of oppression. It's not enough to just talk about the oppression associated with being a woman. One must also talk about the oppression associated with being a black woman, a black disabled woman, a fat black disabled woman, a fat black disabled Muslim woman, and so on. In plainer English, different people's lives suck for a bunch of different reasons. The progressive left has constructed entire university departments just to parse that sentence. The intersecting axes of privilege, domination, and oppression list 14 categories of oppressed groups with a corresponding privileged group for each one. This is cited. There's whites, privileged, versus people of color, oppressed. Masculine and feminine, privileged, versus gender deviants, oppressed. Attractive, privileged, versus unattractive, oppressed. Credentialed, privileged, versus non-literate, oppressed. And even fertile, privileged, versus infertile, oppressed. Our bias in favor of people who can read and write is, according to the axis of privilege, educationalism. Our bias in favor of the fertile is pro-natalism. Our bias in favor of men who look like men and women who look like women is genderism. Heaven help you if you're a literate, attractive, straight white man who looks and behaves like a man. According to the categories of oppression dreamed up by intersectional theorists, nothing and no one could be more privileged. This is why, despite facing their own unique problems, men, and especially white working-class men, are routinely ignored by the new leftist political class. Because regardless of the data, straight white men can never be the victims of anything. Any attempts to address their issues are usually met with outrage and condescension. In 2016, when the British Conservative MP Philip Davies gave a speech at a conference on men's issues, the reaction of feminists in the left-wing Labour Party was to demand he be suspended from his party. As for whites, any attempt to organize is usually received by the mainstream as for the revival of Nazism, despite the fact that much of such organizing activity today comes as a direct response to a culture that appears to hate them. I'd prefer a world with no identity politics. I'd prefer we judge people according to reason, logic, and evidence instead of barmy left-wing theories about oppression. But if you are going to divide everyone up, you have to accept that straight white men are going to want their own special party too. If we are to have identity politics, we must have identity politics for all. Straight white boys in college aren't neo-Nazis for resisting Black Lives Matter and feminism or for advocating for their own identity groups. They are simply responding, entirely logically, to what they've been told about how the world works. It just so happens they have been born into a group that invented the best and worst stuff in history, so they have to deal with that legacy. Popular culture, dominated by the left, is instructive. Movies are filled with petty, mean-spirited jabs at straight white men. Especially lately, yeah, kind of. There's a huge trend in movies that seek to channel white guilt over slavery, like Django Unchained, 10 Years a Slave, and MLK. In the wake of hashtag Oscars So White, this is only getting worse as Hollywood bends over backward to avoid being called racist again. Moonlight was a terribly boring film and never would have won Best Picture if it weren't for white appeasement. The straight white male villains in these movies get progressively more sadistic and irredeemable. Strangely, there are no movies about Ottoman or Middle Eastern slave owners. I suppose we'll have to wait for Muslim guilt to become a thing. With straight white men replacing the Burgios as the hated oppressor class of the left, they've become fair game for smug champagne socialists and entertainment in the media. That's why you routinely see movies, stand-up routines, songs, and Guardian columns about straight white men that would be classified as quote-unquote hate speech if they were directed against any other group in society. White men can't dance, jump, or sexually satisfy their partners. These are all socially acceptable jokes. Call an Irishman a drunk leprechaun or an Italian man, or an Italian a made man, and you'll have no problem. But if you dare joke that black people are loud, Asians can't drive, or Latinos steal, you'll face the full force of triggered Twitter mouth breathers. The new identity-driven left doesn't hate only white men. One of the consequences of replacing the old working class / bourgeois dichotomy with the myriad identities of intersectionality theory is that everything has become much more complicated. Yes, straight white men are the most oppressive, but how do you order everyone else? Are Muslims oppressing women, or are women oppressing Muslims? Is a disabled black man oppressed more than an able-bodied black woman? And what do we do about white men who are, for the sake of argument, extraordinarily gay, but also rich, popular authors of best-selling books about free speech? The result of dividing their political coalition to a hierarchy of victim groups is a tragicomic battle for the bottom. Insert cheap dick-taking joke here. Each group fights to be more oppressed than the others. You see this on social media all the time. Quote-unquote white feminists attack white intersectionalists for not being ethnic enough, and thus not being oppressed enough. Or they are criticized for being too ethnic, aka cultural appropriation. Probably. Since the 1970s, social psychologists have been aware that emphasizing differences between groups leads to mistrust and hostility. In a series of landmark experiments, psychologist Henry Tajfel found that even wearing different colored shirts was enough for groups to begin displaying signs of mistrust. So guess what happens when you tell everyone that their worth, their ability, their right to speak on certain subjects, and, shudder, their quote-unquote privilege is, like original sin, based on what they were born with rather than any choices they've made or who they are. Here's what you get. The modern left. Blacks fighting gays, fighting women, fighting trannies, fighting Muslims, fighting everyone else. It's the iron law of victimhood-driven identity politics. Someone has to win, and everyone else has to lose. Progressive identity politics ignores basic human realities. If you live authentically as yourself, there will be repercussions. Not everyone will like you. Some people may even want you dead. As Friedrich Nietzsche said, Man is the cruelest animal. This is a fact of life, and it is not changed by all the abuse and harassment policies in all of the Silicon Valley. Progressives will never understand this. Identity politics is universally attractive because it enables failures and weaknesses to be spun as the products of oppression and historical injustice. Personal responsibility is removed from the equation. Primary victims of identity politics in reality are the designated oppressor class, for whom it can be humiliating and deeply unfair. The modern leftist movement has argued itself into a position where people can be discriminated against on the basis of gender, skin color, and orientation. Take MTV's White People, a quote-unquote documentary highlighting a handful of cherry-picking examples aimed to demonstrate white privilege, quote-unquote, in action. It's an hour of television designed to produce discomfort in those with the wrong skin color. Or Netflix's Dear White People, another pathetic dose of race baiting. White men can only survive in this new landscape through self-flagellation and groveling apology for what they are by promoting how they're woke, a male feminist, or a straight ally. See Macklemore. Straight white men has become a socially acceptable form of insults. It'll be a while before we see Dear Black People on our screens, much as America's police offers might have something to say to that community. Whew. The future of the progressive movement will be akin to the nightmarish community of grievance bloggers on Tumblr, where minorities, both real and imagined, engage in an endless competition for supreme victimhood status. Welcome to the era of minority wars. If you're gay, they'll ask what your skin color is. If you're black, they'll ask if you're a woman. If you're a woman, they'll ask you to stop worrying about Muslim rapists, you racist. If you happen to fit into every conceivable minority group, heaven help you if your opinions do not precisely follow political orthodoxy. Donald Trump and Margaret Thatcher before him were both right when they said identity politics and name calling is what people do when they don't have any arguments left. The modern left is an Ouroboros, the ancient Egyptian serpent that eats its own tail, constantly consuming itself in a twisted, never-ending cycle of victimhood, hatred, and name-calling. No matter how nice they are to you when they're focusing on your particular group's causes, leftists will always, in the end, find a way to shame you about some alleged privilege, quote-unquote. And if they can't win by public shaming, they rage and flounce off, or at least threaten to. What an entertaining spectacle it was watching all those celebrities walking back their promises to leave the country if Donald Trump was elected. True. There were so many, I remember there were so many celebrities, like, so many that were saying, oh, I'm going to leave, oh, I'm going to go to Mexico or Canada if Trump becomes president, and then, surprise, none of them did. Fucking liars. To the typical actor, threatening to leave the United States over the election was just another set of lines to read. A Trump presidency was supposed to be as likely as Trevor Noah ever having successful ratings. Trevor Noah. I recently watched Sargon McCall's video that he did with the exchange between Trevor Noah and Tomi Lahren. Just amazing. Did you notice that these whiny celebs uniformly threaten to move to overwhelmingly white countries? Imagine the chutzpah and obliviousness it takes to call working-class Americans racist while you plan to move to Canada if your candidate loses. At least Snoop Dogg promised to move to South Africa, although it's hardly the Congo down there. I'm guessing what Snoop had in mind was a nice gated complex with other rich Westerners. Aside from Snoop Dogg, if it wasn't Canada, it was New Zealand, Australia, or another primarily white English-speaking country. Why not Mexico or the Gambia? Guatemala doesn't have a Whole Foods, so Lena Dunham had to cross it off her list. Alright, so that ends. So, why does the left hate us? Scab was a derogatory word used by the unionized workers of the old left to describe strike breakers. People who, during a strike, decided that feeding their families took priority over an abstract idea of left-wing solidarity. The left loathed scabs with a passion far exceeding their hatred for the bourgeois. After all, the bourgeois were just protecting their own interests. By not following the left's marching orders, scabs were allegedly betraying theirs. Once branded as scab, you and your family were scabs for life. No amount of denial or explanation could expiate it. The word scab, and for some is, akin to a swear word, a cursed word. It wasn't Twitter that gave name calling its power. Social media just added mass scale and mob mentality to an earlier leftist strategy to adorn the untouchables with scarlet letters. No prizes then for guessing why the left hates me so much. I'm not one of them. I don't fit into the box they demand of me. I don't fit into any fucking box. I am large. I contain multitudes. Well said. My existence infuriates them not only because I debunk their myths with style, wit, and humor, but also because their usual smears don't work on me. Feminists can't accuse me of suspect motives because I'm not interested in women except in an academic sense. I can't be accused of being homophobic, only that laughable charge of self-hatred, which, come on, I love myself a lot. In short, I'm the left's worst nightmare, a living, breathing refutation of identity politics and proof that free speech and the truth wrapped in a good joke will always be more persuasive and more powerful than identity politics. And I mean, Milo is a big example of like the social justice left and leftists, being angry at someone, a type of person that they claim to stand up for, when that person doesn't agree with their political talking points. Like Milo is a perfect example, other people like, Candace Owens and people like that would be other examples, or like Blair White on YouTube. Which is, again, that video I mentioned earlier in this video, the video where I talked about that type of thing. I'm also particularly terrifying to the left because they see in me a repeat of the 1980s, when workers across Britain and the United States turned to Reaganism and Thatcherism. In the age of Trump, the left are worried I might not be the only dissident minority. They're afraid you might agree with me. Because if you're reading this, there's a good chance you might have realized the left doesn't have your best interest at heart because your heartbreak isn't sad enough. Yeah. I mean, I used to be a lot more left leaning when I was like in high school and like my early college days. But now, I mean, like, even though I still lean left on some issues, like abortion and marijuana and gay marriage, I'm for the most part I lean left on those issues. But like, I've become more in the center. Like I'm more I guess you could say centrist. I call myself libertarian. I think that's easier. But like, yeah, just as a leftist old base abandoned them to become conservative voting Reagan Democrats in the U.S. and Essex men in the U.K., so too will a new wave of dissident women and minorities break apart their coalition. The left's deepest wish is that we rebel minorities didn't exist. Nothing terrifies them so much as the thought of their cherished identity classes going off the reservation. That's why they react so hysterically, or in many cases, so silently to Gamergate's #NotYourShield. It's also why clueless actress Stacey Dash literally lost her social life and wrote a book about it when she came out as all-in Republican. And it's why I, an obnoxiously proud gay man, continue to be called homophobic. The left champions the powerless and fights the powerful. In itself, that's not a bad thing. Many of the basic luxuries we take for granted today, like 2-day weekends, 8-hour workdays, and basic occupational health and safety, were won by leftist workers' rights movements. Other more important achievements, such as the end of lynching in the American South, were won by left-wing activists who instinctively detest injustice. The dark side of this instinct, however, is the hatred of people deemed too successful or well off. The quote-unquote privileged. Puritanism, wrote H.L. Mencken, whose lifetime spanned the first progressive era, is the haunting fear that someone somewhere might be happy, quote-unquote. Who could possibly hate happiness? Those who are denied it themselves. Morally authoritarian movements are attracted to ugly, miserable, talentless people. It offers an outlet for their hatred of the successful and good-looking, and anyone who looks like they might be enjoying themselves. Rush Limbaugh. famously described feminism as a way for ugly women to get attention and enter the mainstream. On my travels around campuses, I observed happy, well-groomed, ambitious, and intelligent Milo fans, as well as the greasy, blue-haired social justice apparitions of protesting outside. Apparitions. My time on campuses exposed a massive flaw in the left's plans for world domination. They'd taken for granted their lock on the youth constituency. The left needs ideological shock troops to propagate its ideas, and none have been more useful to them than impressionable young people who eagerly take up left-wing causes out of their natural inclination to make an impact on the world before the realities of raising children and paying a mortgage set in. Before the realities of raising children. Not everyone has the same fate. I mean, some people choose not to have. Not important. The left convinces young people that The left convinces people that they're going to be heroes. In reality, they're like foot soldiers in the intellectual equivalent of Sami, running at machine guns armed with bayonets. Bored American youth are indoctrinated into wacky, flimsy ideas that never stand up to the real world, leaving them disappointed, disillusioned, and angry. Their grip on the minds of young people is weakening, and I am happy to be a leading cause. My efforts to support millennial gamers and then my dangerous faggot tour rapidly mobilized a new breed of dissident student. And now I've written the textbook on how to fight back against cultural lunacy. To quote esteemed author Michael Walsh, the only weapon they have is our own weakness. It is our wish to be seen as reasonable, as proportional, as judicious, as measured, all leftist terms, that hinders us from taking decisive action against them. Far too long, conservatives have relied on pundits whose audience is primarily over 60. In the case of Fox News, it's over 70. Do you really think anyone who isn't two score into senior citizens discounts wants to have Charles Krauthammer, Stephen Hayes, Frank Luntz, Rich Lowry, or Karl Rove on their television screen? Young people have always been instinctively anti-establishment, and that's where I come in. There is no other libertarian or conservative pop culture figure who comes close to the purchase I have with Generation Next, who are sick of being lectured to by the increasingly nannying left. America's young conservatives and libertarians are looking for heroes. I'm happy to oblige. Without an endless supply of eager young activists, the left is nothing, and I am hoovering up those young people and spitting them out as mischievous, dissident free speech warriors who don't give a damn about your feelings. For hundreds of thousands of students, simply reading this book has become the ultimate statement of rebellion. To them I say, Milo merchandise is also available while supplies last. You've seen how liberals respond when their backs are against the wall. With hate, because they've forgotten how to argue, all the while trumpeting their own moral superiority. Well, here's something I've learned during my time in America. Aggressive public displays of virtue are where the morally deplorable hide. Interesting statement. And that is the end of chapter 1. And this has been almost an hour, like I said. So, again, disclaimer at the end: none of the written words, opinions, or ideas in this book are my own. I don't own the rights to this book, and I am not the author. I am merely reading and sharing my own thoughts and opinions. So, that's it for this one. Let me know what you think, and again, let me know if you want me to read some of these chapters with a British accent. I will do the best that I can, if you want me to do that. But yeah, so the next video, we will read Why the Alt-Right Hates Me, which will be an interesting chapter. That's interesting to find out, because it's interesting. It's interesting to see that Milo is kind of addressing the extremes of both sides. So, anyways, that's it for this one, and I'll talk to you guys later. So, peace and have a good day.